Webinar sponsored by AdvancedMD and Metagain entitled The 5 Key Financial Metrics for 2014, subtitled Protecting Your Practice's Revenue in the Age of the Affordable Care Act. As I said before, this webinar will be recorded and you will be getting a link to it after the webinar is over. If you have questions, please use the questions section on the right side in your GoToWebinar control panel. And speaking of panel, allow me to introduce today's panelists for you for this webinar. Our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Eric Beyer, MD, MBA. He is a physician, honed his teeth in emergency medicine. He built a billing and reimbursement company up from the ground up, and he's also a certified coder. And as happens to physicians, he had an emergency arise, but through the rehearsals, I can cover his slides. We also have the district manager for AdvancedMD, Mr. Andy Rowell. Say hi, Andy.
Hello, everybody.
And we also have the Vice President for Business Development, Robert Romero with Metagain. Robert?
Good afternoon, everyone.
And I am Clint Hughes. I'm your host and moderator today. I'm the VP of Marketing for Metagain. So let's get right into it. Like I said, I'll be covering Dr. Beyer's sections of the slides. We've rehearsed it several times. So the overview, your practice is a business, and with every business you should have a business plan. And in that planning, how are you going to plan for healthcare reform? Where do you see your practice being in 2 years, 3 years, and 5 years? Let's look at the current core competencies. With the physicians, your core competency is providing quality health care for your patients. For the chief administrators there on the line, your core competency is helping the business run smoothly. As in business, dividing the jobs that are needed to be done, it all depends. You wouldn't divide somebody's time half to accounting and half to sales. And some offices do devote their personnel half to other projects and half to some of their billing and reimbursements. When we are looking at fee for value instead of the traditional fee for service, part of providing that value is being able to do things more effectively and more efficiently. Basically taking 5 jobs and cutting it down to 3. How are you able to do this? Well, it all depends on the IT that you have and the infrastructure that you have. Is your EMR and your practice management system, are they integrated? Because that is really the first 2 steps in getting you compliant for ICD-10, because it is through those 2 systems that you will be lining up the codes from ICD-9 into the new codes of ICD-10 and doing the crosswalk. You need to be sure that your providers have already done the crosswalking for you, have been testing it, and have been testing it with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So when you're looking at all that, you really have to address the partners that you're going to be working with as you are trying to address those goals and expand your business and your practice in the upcoming year. So good IT capabilities, that does equal the ability to make good business decisions. Part of that is gathering the data with the IT. This is where the integration of your electronic medical records or electronic health records, EHR, EMR, and your practice management system is so vital. Because when you have those 2 linked together, you can link the financial and the clinical analytics together. And this is where you begin to start touching into the fee for value as opposed to fee for service. And you need to have the good data to make the good decisions. And those are some of the metrics that we will be going over with you today. So at the very beginning, to be able to handle all this and have the data to do the good decisions, you need to be sure that your EMR and your PMS are integrated in the software functionality to be able to handle what you are doing now and what you look to do in the future. You have to get all the reimbursements, and so what we have found out, like in the switch to 5010, there's usually a lag, and there is a proliferation of claims being denied at the very beginning of the switch, and we anticipate that when we switch over to ICD-10 as well. So being able to optimize your denials management is very important for your cash flow here in the near and in the future. Being able to maximize your charge capture and the patient eligibility verification, that is crucially important, especially with a bunch of new people being able to be covered by health care because of the Affordable Care Act. So some of the exchanges, some of them might not have even made their first payment as of yet, and they're showing up at your office. Be sure as you are scheduling and confirming the appointments that the people have made their first payment into the exchange. It doesn't do them or you any good if they make the call and do that payment as they're driving over to your office, because then it will be extra time and a bottleneck as you're having them call the customer service number on the back of the card and work with them to be sure that you are verified, that they are verified and have insurance. And part of all the switch that's coming up in October 1 is that improving the coding and the documentation and preparing for ICD-10. If you're doing it in-house and you have your coders in-house, some of the specialties of their job is going to become 10 times more difficult with the explosion of codes and diagnosis that will be coming for ICD-10. So in your business plan, do you have the capabilities to handle the changes that are coming up in affordable health care? And that leads us to our first polling question. The first question that we are going to be asking today on the poll is, how will the Affordable Care Act affect your staff? Do you see you having to increase staff? Do you think you will be decreasing your staff, or do you project that your staff level will remain about the same? Go ahead and make your choice and then hit submit. Right now we have about 50% of the people who have voted. Please put a check, submit. We'll keep it open for about 15, 20 more seconds. With all the changes coming based on the Affordable Care Act, all the documentation, do you think that you will be able to keep it with the same staff level, or because of the cost you'll have to decrease staff to keep your profit margins, or you think you're going to have to increase your staff? Well, right now about 90% of you have voted, so let's close that and let's share the results at this time. So the vast majority, 79% of you all, say that your staff level is projected to remain the same, 16% an increase, 5% anticipate a decrease. So let's move right on to our first presenter today. This is Andy Rowell. He is the District Manager for Advanced MD, and he will be covering how Advanced MD, with their integrated electronic medical records and practice management system, can help you prepare for these changes and allow you to get the metrics that you need to manage. So, Andy?
Thanks. So Clint talked about the need for an integrated practice management and a clinical solution in your office. So what I wanted to talk about is what that solution should look like. From a front office perspective, it should include a cloud scheduling system so that everyone everywhere is updated in real time. It should have e-eligibility, as Clint mentioned, so that you know coverage before the patient shows up and you're not dealing with that after the fact. Credit card processing and credit card on file so that you can keep your AR low. A complete and certified clinical tool is also a key component. So this electronic health record should allow you to document notes quickly, allow you to manage health maintenance protocols efficiently for your patients, and prescribe and refill medications in just a single click. The solution should also be mobile. Access to patient data should be fast, easy, and comprehensive. It should include tools like scheduling, charge capture, and EHR, all delivered on your phone or tablet to make your life more manageable. Working from remote places like the hospital or clinic or even at home is just as easy as working in your office. And then charge capture. Some folks out there may not be ready to make the transition to a full-blown electronic health record, and that's definitely okay. The Advanced MD iPad charge capture tool allows you to send charges over electronically to the billing side with just a touch of the finger. There's no paper involved, and the simplicity makes it very easy to adopt within a practice. This allows a premier partner like Medigame to receive those charges in real time and initiate the claims and billing process immediately, which ends up getting you paid much faster. Since these tools are in the cloud, they're updated automatically for ICD-10 compliance, and then any other regulatory changes that may come down in the future.
So Andy, because this came up in the last webinar, when we say that here's the easy solution for ICD-10 compliance, even if you don't have a full-blown EMR, this is being able to use the ADP practice management system and this charge capture app, and you will be ICD-10 compliant without really having a full-blown MER?
Absolutely, that's correct.
That's good. That's one of the things we promised them. And speaking of ICD-10,
yeah, definitely. So as the deadline approaches, it's going to become more and more. There's an increased need to review your strategy. There will likely be an impact not only on the software side, but also on people and processes within an office. So on the technology side, ADP's invested $10 million into R&D and engineering to ensure compliancy within our software. So you're definitely covered there. To aid our customers with the people and the processes components, we developed a dedicated page on our website for the ICD-10 transition and timelines. And there's a snippet of it here that you're looking at. It's myicd10.advancedmd.com is where you can find this. And we're really looking at the ICD-10 transition in a three-phase approach. First functional, then enhanced, and then optimal. On the functional side, things like dual coding, just typical claim submissions, system reports, and carrier testing will all facilitate the claims process. Then moving into the enhanced mode, mapping tools will be available, mobile solutions, ICD-10 success tracker to allow you to understand at all times where you are with your compliance. And then moving into the optimal, enhanced mapping tools leveraging what we call smart gem technology to make sure that the crosswalks between 9 and 10 are accurate and also getting you paid the maximum reimbursement. So all three of these stages, enhanced, functional, enhanced, and optimal, will occur ahead of the ICD-10 compliance deadline of October. So you'll begin the crawl, the walk, and then the run well into the October timeline.
great, Andy. Thank you very much. So some of you answered the questions when you were registering about what kind of EMR and practice management system that you use. And after Andy's presentation, this leads us to our second survey question. Are you doing your billing in-house? Are you outsourcing it? Or are you doing a mixture of both? So go ahead and select one of the following choices and press Submit. Because with AdvancedMD and their integrated system, that helps pave the way for you to be ICD-10 compliant and start to gather the data that you need. Great. We have about 80% of the people who have voted so far. We will leave it open for about 10 more seconds. So make your choice and click Submit. So let's close out this poll and let's share it. There we go. Gosh, 2/3 of you all are doing it in-house. About 20% of you have outsourced it, and about 16% are doing both. So let's move right on to Robert Romero, who is the Vice President of Business Development for Metagain, and he will be showing you the 5 key metrics you need to watch in 2014. And also, Robert, I think you're going to be giving them a little bonus as well, correct?
Yes, sir. So it's great to work with a company like ADP AdvancedMD because between the data that we can get from a top-tier system and our reporting mechanisms and analysts, we can really answer the call that so many of our clients have requested over the last few years for greater and greater and greater reporting so that they can make good business decisions and then they can monitor their own revenue cycle, whether they do it themselves or whether they're monitoring or managing a professional billing service like Metagain. So the 5 that we're going to go over today are going to make some comparisons and use some ratios. The first one is going to be the overall collection rate versus the closed claim collection rate. The second one is going to be a reimbursement ratio, but we're going to split it now by payer and by CPT code. Then we're going to ask the question, what if all we got was paid the Medicare allowable? on certain CPT codes. Would we pass or would we fail? We're going to look at zero-only write-offs for root cause. And then we're going to look at, I think, a little bit different way to look at the accounts receivable tests than a lot of people have looked at them in the past. So, Clint, let's go in and we'll start the overall collection rate versus the closed claim collection rate. To do this, we basically gather all the metrics we can from your current system. And we're looking for a pretty simple ratio to start with, and that's your overall collections rate. What charges went out, what money came in. We'll compare that with a closed claim reimbursement rate, which is not going to include any of the claims that are stuck in AR or were written off. So these closed claims were the ones that were submitted, most likely pretty clean or fixed very easily. The payer made payment, all or most of it. Patient made payment, all or most of it. It was tied up in a bow, and it was all complete. The difference between these two numbers is kind of a starting point every time we look at a practice, because the question is, remember, what if all of my claims were paid as good as the average of my best claims, all right? In this particular example that you have on your screen, and make sure you maximize your screen so you can see all of the numbers. This particular practice had a current collection rate of 21.5% and a closed claim reimbursement rate of 27%. Keep in mind, all of your practices might be slightly different depending on your charge markup percentage. If you're marking up all of your charges 2.5 times the Medicare allowable, or in this case, it's probably 3 times the Medicare allowable, 2.5 would make your target, your total target at 100% collections, 40%, right? And if it was three times, it'd make your, if you were perfect, or we were perfect, you'd make the total target 33%. In this particular case, there's about a 6-point spread, 5.5 to 6-point spread between all of the claims and then an average of the best claims. So it's pretty easy to make an initial target to raise the reimbursement of about $60,000. These tests also show us a few other things, little sub-tests inside of them. And although I don't know what happened in the practice, I can tell somewhere in August, September, October timeframe, the number of visits were the same across the year. The number of the charge amount per visit was the same across the year, but the payments per visit dropped from 800 in the early part of this data set down to 650 in the latter part of the data set. The reimbursement ratio also went from about 24% at the top of the, or at the left-hand side earlier, and it's ending, even omitting the last month or so for open claims, it's down to about 20%. So raising the average from 21 to 27 is pretty reasonable, just going in and cleaning up coding, verification benefits, pre-auths, and putting in a pretty aggressive professional denials management policy. $60,000 is the potential for this particular group. So let's show you another example. Different group, slightly different metrics. The page looks similar until we start to look at the numbers. This particular practice, their overall collection rate, 56%. Their closed claim collection rate, 63%. I think many of us would guess off the top of our head that they probably mark up their charges about 1.5 times Medicare allowable to be kind of in this ratio range. And if we, once again, look at what has happened to their reimbursement ratio, the collection rate is the blue line, kind of runs across right through the dead center of the data. It's pretty easy to see the trend has gone south, and I would also assume this is probably why they are now looking at a professional service. For this practice, 27% is the target, and then we use some of these other tests that are going to follow. If that's our target, well, where is the money, and is that a realistic target? Okay. To start with, we're going to look at reimbursement ratios by CPT and reimbursement ratios by payer. So Clint, go on to the next set, please. Perfect. So reimbursement ratio by CPT, these are all closed claims, okay? So this is where we get our closed claim ratio, because we're not going to look at anything that's stuck in AR or has been written off. These are the average of the best claims that went through for this particular group. The very center highlighted column, the gross reimbursement column, this is the one that we really want to pay attention to. On the far right-hand side, the net reimbursement, this has been grossed up back to kind of a 100-point scale. For me, I like to look at the raw numbers, because if there are like procedures on the left-hand side and in the code side, I'd like to think that those like procedures had similar gross reimbursement ratios. Remember, it doesn't matter if you get $2,000 for one procedure and $1,000 for another procedure, net back to you. These are ratios based on the charge and the payment. The more consistent or the more equal your fee schedule markup is, the more accurate this data becomes. So in this particular case, I also know that they used a separate fee schedule for their clinical visits than their procedures. If you look at the two that are a little darker on the service code side, 99213s and 99214s, these should have, all right, relatively close reimbursement ratios. For the level 3 visit, it's 40%. For the level 4 visit, it's 47%. Just to share everything with some knowledge that we see in practices across the country, this isn't actually a statistic that is too abnormal. People tend to pay more attention to their level 4 visits documentation-wise, because they know they're asking for more money and could be under greater scrutiny. So they take better notes. They do better documentation. The level 3 and level 2 visits that seem very routine, sometimes a professional billing service has a little harder time getting full payment on those if the documentation is just kind of average. So Clint, let's look at another one, and this one's going to be very, very similar. It's reimbursement ratio, okay, but this time we divided it by payer. This particular page was taken from an analysis. They specifically asked us to compare 2012 reimbursement with 2013. I'm kind of going to focus my energy on the 2013 because this is the most relevant section. And the first thing that comes to mind when you start to split your reimbursement ratio now by payer, in this particular case, the top 4 payers are all commercial payers, but there's a fairly wide variance between the reimbursement ratios with these payers. Does one in your particular area of the country pay you a few percentage points higher than one of the others? Absolutely, that's going to show in this test. But the variance between Blue Cross, for example, and Cigna, that's bigger than your contracted differential. And since this particular practice, Blue Cross is by far and away their largest payer, there's something falling short in the billing or the follow-up of those Blue Cross Blue Shield claims. We all know that they're a little bit more stringent for pre-authorizations, and their documentation for medical necessity is a little bit more stringent in the last few years. My guess is this practice has some room for improvement in that particular area. Another good number to look at is the Medicare claims. The Medicare percentage is 34% of those grossed up charges that were paid out. And everyone knows that Medicare is not going to pay you as much as your commercial payers, but if you follow their guidelines and you submit it timely, you do get paid actually quite quickly. So if that's your baseline, and you know in your practice that your commercial payers tend to pay you X amount more or a little bit of a multiple more than Medicare, you can use that when you run these individual tests for yourself as a good guideline. So Clint, we're going to look at zero write-offs now. And there's, we're going to look at the fee schedule comparables. So this test is another very simple question. What if all I got paid for my claims was what the Medicare allowable was? Knowing that your commercial payers tend to pay you more than the Medicare allowable, you would expect your total collections for that particular CPT code to be greater than if all you got was the Medicare allowable. So this is kind of a pass-fail test, and we're only using closed claims once again. So only the claims that went through, this is an average of the best claims. And the two highlighted columns on the left, one is the average payment that this practice actually received, and then the other is the Medicare allowable for this particular region or this particular state. And the possible loss column on the right-hand side is, did we at least get paid the Medicare allowable fee across the board? In this particular practice, they're upside down by $10,000. That's real money. That's part of the target. And the test itself, like I said, is a pass-fail. You want to look at it specifically by CPT in your list. So if you run this test yourself, or you have your billing company or your practice management system company run this test, you're looking for pass-fail, and then anything that's a fail, that's the CPT you want to go back and look into. Are we documenting that correctly? Are we getting the pre-auths correctly? What are we doing to not even get paid Medicare equal money? This test also will highlight whether the fee schedule is in line with a consistent markup or not. The far right-hand column, times billed, there's a couple CPTs in here that are scary close to not being billed enough. 1.2 times Medicare, 1.4 times Medicare, excuse me, you'll have private payers, commercial payers, pay you more than you're asking for on these particular codes. It's common for us to see a fee schedule set very well, and then each year, it's not the fee schedule that's being set wrong. It's just that the Medicare allowable is moving. And in this era of the Affordable Care Act, we all know some of the high-end procedure reimbursements are coming down, but then there are plenty of others for well visits and things like that where the reimbursement is actually coming up. If you only ask for $120 and somebody's willing, the commercial payer is willing to give you $140, if you don't ask, you don't get. All you'll get is what you ask for. So maintaining your fee schedule is another lecture on this particular test. Let's look at one more example of this. Go on to the next slide for me, sir. Perfect. A little bit different view of the same test. And in this particular test, the payment per CPT and the Medicare allowable are highlighted in blue. Some of these are so different from one another, it's pretty easy to eyeball that this practice has some work to do. The very, very top line, the very top code, by far and away their biggest by payments, Medicare allowed $91, and they're averaging $130. So the total amount collected on that particular code passes the test with flying colors. There's $70,000 in the black. all right? However, all of the focus and attention on that particular code doesn't seem to be having the same effect on the majority of the rest of the codes. Now, by looking at the CPT codes, I can tell that this is a surgery type facility, and it's probably multi-specialty. So some of the codes in certain groups are really failing the test. They're not even getting paid the Medicare allowable, and for high dollar codes, that's something that is correctable. It's a pre-auth, it's a coding, it's a denials management. I don't know which one it is for each one of these codes, but it's in that list somewhere. The good thing about this test for this practice, it's fixable. And it's also a real number that goes into part of that target that we talked about to start. All right, one more set of tests. Now we're going to talk about the zero write-offs. Clint, go ahead. There we go. So most analysis people or practice consultants will run tests on all of the write-offs, partial, full, everything. Here's what you wrote off. Here's what the adjustments were. I'm not counting those. But these were true write-offs where you asked for money and didn't get what you expected. What we prefer to do, and what I'm going to suggest to you, is don't look at all of your write-offs. Just look at the zero pays. The zero pays will narrow down to root cause, and you'll see a pattern in either the CPT codes at the top or your payers at the bottom when you start looking at just the total zeros. You can take it one step further. Clint, go on to the next one for me. And this is the very same test. Go back one, sorry. There we go. This is the exact zero write-off test, except this one only measured CPT codes with the same mix on a visit, same payer, same provider that were paid early in the period and somehow totally zero written off, not sitting in AR waiting to get paid, but completed, closed, written off in the same time frame. So this combination was paid and then subsequently not paid. We'll trace every one of these claims back, and those results will be root causes that can be corrected and fixed. Once again, even just the zero paid on this particular test comes up with real money, $25,000 or $26,000. That adds into the target. For your particular practice, when you run a test like this, you absolutely want to pay attention to the CPT codes at the top. There are certain payers that pay certain codes and certain payers that won't pay that code at all. That combination is actually okay to be in here. Talk to your IPA about getting you paid for those on that payer. But at ground level, you will always know certain things about your particular practice, even if we give you good black and white analysis that make total sense. But the majority of the things that you'll see in a test like this are areas and room for improvement. Medicare should not be at the high point of anyone's zero write-offs. Once again, submit it by their guidelines, do it quickly, and you get paid. Okay. Clint, let's talk about some AR now. All right. So to start with, I'm going to let you know that days in AR has historically been a test that everyone has run like gospel. And today, with the modern era systems, it's not as important a number as it's been in the past, because it's too easily manipulated and it's too easy to skew that number. So I'm going to ask you to look at your AR the way we look at AR for a prospective client or for a new client, And days in AR really isn't going to be a key focus. We'll do the test because everybody wants to know. But let's talk about rollover, and let's talk about possible loss. And I'm going to show you two pretty distinctly different examples. So what you have on the screen here is a good example of a practice that gets good money in during the first 60 days. And if you look at the green grand total column across the bottom, from 60 to 90, 90 to 120, and then 120 into the 150, there's very, very, very little money coming in month over month. In fact, when we ran the test, we found that the payments that came in during the first 60 days were posted, and then the full balance was immediately written off, and the claim was closed. That's either the worst ever auto-posting setup that we've all ever seen, or, in my highly technical consultant's language, somebody had an itchy trigger finger to get that claim, finished and off the books. No secondaries were submitted. The patient balance, if it was still outstanding at that point, it was written off, so they never even got the third letter. The balances rolled over from 60 to 90, 90 to 120. I invite you to run this test on your own AR. So take a snapshot of your AR buckets, like the accountants will call them, at the end of February. And then in a few days, take it again at the end of March. The first two columns, current and 30 days, should be loaded. That's money about to come to you. But the 60-day bucket in February, if that is now the same number of the equivalent dollar amount that has rolled over and is now the same dollar amount in the 90-day bucket in the next month, and subsequently last month's 90-day bucket number is the same as our new 120-day bucket number, then there simply isn't either time or expertise that's paid to denials management or to appeals. This practice is not getting anywhere near their max reimbursement. And guess what? Their days in AR probably look great because of the itchy trigger finger. All right, let's look at one completely opposite example. So on your screen here is a good example of this group had put this practice management system, a new practice management system, in 14 months ago. The current and 30-day columns are just fine by all of our judgment, but the 60-day column and then subsequently the 90-day column in 2012 or in 2013, the numbers actually went up in this case. Normally they're pretty static if there's rollover. They must have just had a really good month 3 months ago, and there's so much work to do that they actually have no chance to do any appeals. So the 60-day column's rolling into the 90. The 90 is just piling up in the 120. And in this particular case, we notice that 0 write-offs had been taken at all. So it's all piling up. It's well over a year's worth that's piling up. That's not good for your accounting. But then again, neither was the itchy trigger finger that wrote things off too fast before. Okay. One last test to look at, and this is your bonus. Clint, go one more page for me. Perfect. In the Metagame package of monthly reports that we provide to our clients, your practice management systems and the top tier ones, this is why we like AdvancedMD so much, really give us great data. We go a step further to take that data and try to put it into formats that help you, the administrator, and you, the physician, make good, sound business decisions in the practice. So a CPT code list down the left-hand side, your payers across the top, and the highest payment on that code per payer is the squares that are highlighted on this list. Sometimes people expect to see exactly what's on this. Sometimes there's some surprises if you can see your data in this light. It's a great exercise to go through. I invite you to do it with your current practice management system or your current billing company. And remember, these are the types of tests that Metagain does for any potential new client that we're going to work with. These are just 5 tests. We really run about close to a dozen. And that process can really show you an awful lot about your practice that you've probably never seen before. So Clint, those are the highlights of all the major tests. You look like you got another poll.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we do. So let's go to the last question in our poll here. This is always interesting to find out. So, is your practice privately owned, or are you owned by a hospital group? It's interesting. We like to keep track of this as it's going through. Click, you've got 2 choices. So about, the votes are piling in. Over 75% of you have voted so far. We'll keep it open here for another 15 or 20 seconds. It's real easy, just 2 choices. Choose and give a click. All right, and we're wrapping it up in 4, 3, 2, 1. So we'll close out that one, and let's share the results here. So, vast majority, 98%, are privately owned. Only 2% owned by a hospital group. So we know that you guys are very interested in being sure that you get the maximum reimbursement. So right now, let's go into a brief question and answer section. It'll be basically Andy Rowell here with Advanced MD, and Robert with Metagain as the VP of Business Development. So Robert, a question came in. These figures are great, but what if I can't pull them out of my existing package that I have?
That's a good question. I think Andy's probably busting to answer this one as well, because if you can't get this type of data out of your current system, then it's time to move up to a top-tier system. There are plenty of systems out there in use. I won't use any brand names, but they're inexpensive. They probably helped a lot of practices get off the ground and were very functional. But in modern era, they just don't have the capacity to do so many things that you need to get maximum reimbursement for, track all this data. So if Metagain did a practice analysis for that particular practice, we tap into the data that you have, claims level data, and then build all these reports from scratch. But recommendation number 1, after we go through all the metrics, is going to be it's time to upgrade to a top-tier system like Advanced MD.
Well, and speaking about that, Robert, somebody came in and said, what is the cost of this program? Because on the sign-up sheet it said, if your practice management system is out of date, you might qualify for a free upgrade. So fill us in on that.
Yeah. Also, a good question, and I'm sure Andy will be happy to hear me endorse their system again. Metagain works on a number of top-tier systems, but one of our favored ones is Advanced MD. It's perfect for a small, mid-size, and even a large practice out there. And since we need all the Advanced MD tools to get max reimbursement, if the client doesn't have a top-tier system, we'll plug Advanced MD in at our cost because we need it to do our job. So it's included. It's typically licensed by provider. So we'll cover the cost of that built in to our services.
Great. Andy, here's one for you. said, will AdvancedMD be ready with full integration with Emma, and when will all payer testing be available?
Now, is that in reference to ICD-10?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So the claim submission part, going back to my original three-pronged approach, the functional side will be available in May. So it may take, with some of the interface partners that we work with, like Emma, may take a few weeks to roll out to with the interface development component in play there. But yeah, so it should be a May-June timeframe for Emma and those other interface partners.
Okay, and it let me see. Okay, that was that question. Here we have another question that has just come in. I'm trying to think of the better way to phrase this. I guess it says, how is the best way to pull the closed claim report out of ADP? Do you know that off the top of your head, Andy?
Closed claim report?
Yeah.
I'm not sure specifically which one that would be in reference to. The reports module, everything is categorized by report type. So, and then my suggestion would be, if they're having trouble with that, if they can't find the one that they're looking for, just give support a quick call, and they can walk them through whichever report they're looking for.
Okay. And Robert, this is one that's similar to the one that we had on the last webinar about the readiness of the payers. What about their readiness on receiving the claims, via ICD-10?
Good question, and I think this is the question of the year that everybody has. And keep in mind, you've got a number of different components to you being ICD-10 ready. You and your staff, obviously, your system, which carries a lot of that the burden of making sure that you're ready. Your billing company is a great person to monitor everything in between. And the clearinghouse and the payers, I think the billing company and the software companies, they will be the first to really see if everything, if the ICD-10 claims are going through as expected and getting paid as expected. If we look back at 5010, the professional billing companies across the country, including Metagain, proved out to be very ready. The top-tier software vendors, and I'll emphasize top-tier again, were also very ready. It was the clearinghouses and the payers which had a bit of a slowdown, and I think everybody felt it. Having clients from coast to coast and on multiple clearinghouses, we saw really universally claims that were submitted in February were paid in February, and claims that were submitted in January were paid in March. So be prepared. A lot of advisors are out there telling you to have a certain amount of cash reserves, and as scary as it is to think of, it's reality, because it's already happened to us once. It was all caught up, of course, but you don't want to have a cash flow gap. If you can help it, if you're ready, your billers are ready, your software companies are already proven to be ready, but it's all a guess to us if the other two major parties, the clearinghouses and the payers, are going to be ready. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I know that Dr. Beyer in a previous webinar suggested that people plan ahead and have between 3 and 6 months of cash reserves on hand, just in case there is some lagging and the payers aren't up to speed, because it's easier to get a loan when you have a little money stayed in the bank than when cash flow is zero and there's nothing there and you go for a loan. So start saving up now, have about 3 to 6 months worth of cash reserve, and also talk to your banker now about lining up a letter of credit to, better to be forewarned and forearmed. And so I think this answers the person's question about if we suggest that they go ahead and submit the authorizations and billing now under ICD-10 to be sure that they're doing it correctly. And I think CMS is going to start opening up some testing. And what does your My ICD-10 timeline say on that, Andy, about them doing some dry runs about submissions?
Yeah, I think that's a, if I'm remembering correctly, that's like an April timeframe for testing. And I know it's going to vary. It will definitely vary by payer. But if I remember Medicare correctly, I think it's an April to May timeframe.
Okay. What is the best thing that they can do to effectively keep their AR down consistently?
So with if you've got the ability to monitor the types of metrics that we just talked about, then you should be able to monitor your clean claims ratio, which is another one of the great ratios. How many of your claims are accepted the very first time through? And then if something gets beyond 60 days, this is usually the biggest deficit from a practice getting their max reimbursement and then something that's just fair or average. Having a good denials management and appeals program, there's two things, there's two parts of that. One comes actually before the claim is submitted to make sure that that claim is coded, modifiers are done correctly, and it's scrubbed well. Diagnosis match CPT codes. Some of the software out there will help you with that quite a bit. And then the other half is just pure manpower. The practices that fall behind in their AR are the ones that just don't have the manpower. And for appeals and denials, it's not rocket science. Sometimes it's just expertise and manpower. That's all.
Okay, that just about covers it for the questions. I just wanted to let Doug out there know that I will be getting you in touch with Andy. If any of you guys have any questions, if you'd like a practice analysis, there are several different ways on the Metagain website to get them. I will be sending everybody a copy of that ebook about the 5 financial trends for 2014. You can fill out a form there on the Metagain site, call that number, and we can arrange for Andy and his group to give you live demos of the Charge Capture app, the EMR, and the practice management system. And Robert and his team is more than happy to work with you on a practice analysis so you can see some of the great data that we have shown for you today. So any additional questions, send them there into marketing. And watch your inboxes, because we're going to have some more webinars with AdvancedMD, especially heading up to the ICD-10. As the deadline gets closer and closer, people get a little more anxious each time. So I'd like to say thank you to Andy Rowell, who is the district manager for AdvancedMD, that good-looking guy right up there in the upper right, and to Robert Romero, our VP of Business Development. I'm Clint Hughes, the Vice President of Marketing. Thank you very much for your attendance today, and let us know what we can do for you. Bye-bye now.